No, that's not a mod. This is just one of many weird things that happen if you decide to escape the map boundaries of Red Dead Redemption 2. Have you ever wondered what actually lies beyond the invisible walls as far as the eye can see? If we crossed this barrier, what kind of oddities and Easter eggs would we find? Well, that's exactly what I did, and I found an astonishing amount of both beautiful and very, very weird things that I want to share with you today. We're stopping at 10 strange, hidden or straight up bizarre locations I managed to find outside the map of Red Dead Redemption 2. And trust me, the further we go, the more strange things get. For number 1, we start far west on the map, just outside of the boundaries of West Elizabeth. Out here in the harsh, snowy environment, we can find the first location, an avalanche that has flattened a ton of trees. We can see the trees have been bent and distorted in all sorts of directions as the snow has come piling down on top of them. And yeah, these trees are completely outside the map's boundary. So why is there a random avalanche here? Well, apparently this is a set piece that was intended to be featured in one of the very earliest missions, where we had to save John Marston out in the snow. For whatever reason, it never ended up getting used, so we just find this avalanche out here sitting there doing nothing. But as I began to look around me, I noticed something odd. The mountains out here are huge, and they look much bigger than the mountains in-game. You can really get a fantastic view of this mountain range by standing atop of what is supposed to be the game's tallest mountain, Mount Hagen, which is inside the playable zone. And when I stood on top of Mount Hagen and looked out into the distance, I could clearly see there were mountains far taller than this. Which brings me to my interesting discovery. What is the tallest mountain really in the game? With the help of a trainer, I started to take some measurements using the in-game coordinates. So using this, we could see that Mount Hagen stood at a rather impressive 300 units high. So I wanted to see just how tall this massive mountain was I was seeing from the top of Mount Hagen. And upon reaching it, I discovered that the views from up here extend for miles and miles beyond that. Oh yeah, and let's just say Mount Hagen definitely is tiny from up here. It's that tiny little rock down there. And I still wasn't even at the peak of this new mountain yet. But as you can see, way off into the other direction, something we'd never usually see, the landscape out here becomes absolutely astonishing. One of my favourite peaks here reminds me of that one scene from Lord of the Rings, when you get to see the mountains in that wide-angle view, and you're like, wow. It's impressive how much detail some of these mountains have, for something you'd never actually see. Except for that one, obviously, but yeah, expect some texture glitches throughout this video. So I finally reached the peak of this brand new mountain, and oh my god. The views from up here were double as good as they were on Mount Hagen, and using the in-game coordinates, this mountain is double the height. But something extremely interesting was that when I paused the game, I discovered that the peak of this mountain is technically inside of the playable boundary, meaning this is the tallest mountain in the game, so I'm going to call it Dr. Mod Peak. But anyway, we need to move on to location number 3. Just below this mountain we find even more interesting oddities. There are these large glacier cracks in the floor which aren't part of the explorable map. So why are such detailed and cool landmarks left out here, like this completely out of view? Walking through these glaciers is really interesting. It's kind of a crime that these were never utilized in game. And technically just north of here, we find another really interesting glacier that's actually marked on the map with the very creative name, Glacier. You can see it from the playable map, but you can't get inside of it. The only way inside is to glitch your way in, and once you do so, it suddenly feels like you've stepped into a scrapped location. There's a solid floor, there's proper walkways, and you can see down into this sheer void of darkness, which is absolutely terrifying, but it also makes me think, surely this was supposed to be a location we were meant to explore at one point. However, the interesting spots just keep on coming, because just west of here, we can find an entire frozen lake outside of the playable region. And this place is one of my favourites, because if you looked at this from face value, you would have no idea that this was something outside of the playable region. But there is something wrong with it, and in order to find out what that is, you have to just go a bit closer, and then you end up seeing through the illusion. It turns out that the ice here has absolutely no collision, and stepping into it makes you fall through it into this dark, black void of randomness, and there's trees down here as well. But that's not the only thing, because near here there's also a frozen river, or stream, that you can follow. And I started noticing that a lot of the boulders and rocks started having glitched textures. Also, for the first time throughout my entire exploration, I found animals, meaning this place is probably the most finished and most utilised out of bounds area, which makes me wonder if this was also supposed to be a location we were meant to explore at some point. But now it's time to explore some really wacky stuff. I was exploring this really beautiful out of bounds area I stumbled across, and I found an oddity that I think you'll find quite funny. Let's see if you can spot it. No, it's not the fact that my horse just shat all over the floor, it's this floating dev cube, our final landmark in the snowy region. A floating dev cube randomly out here for no apparent reasoning. And it's stuff like this that I absolutely love to find in games, because why is it here? Who put it here? What was it used for? There's so many unanswered questions, and frankly I have no time to answer them, because it's time to move on to some more interesting stuff that we can find, and I don't want to bore you guys with explaining why there's a floating cube here. So it's time to move on now to Annesburg, where we can find the Lanahihi River. This river cuts a clean divide through the land, almost like the game is warning you that this is the end of the world. But what's really cool is that if you look closely, you can see that the lake extends way beyond the view of where we're allowed to go. This is the point though where the game wants you to stop. But it's if you cross this river that I found some of the most surreal discoveries that I definitely didn't expect. First of all, I found a beach which seems to, for some reason, make Arthur cough uncontrollably. Yeah, so if you stand on this beach opposite this river, for some reason Arthur will literally just cough his guts up constantly. So I'm going to name this place Tuberculosis Beach. If anyone has any idea why Arthur is coughing his guts up here, then let me know. But this was probably one of the stranger discoveries in this area. But not the strangest in the whole video today. But what if we just kept on going north following this river? Where does the lake actually end? So with the help of a trainer, I spawned in a canoe. And it turns out that if you follow the river north, the lake just keeps stretching out. And in the distance you can see where the landscape kind of begins to fall apart. There's less detail, missing textures, and yeah, that's a sign that you're exploring an area you're not supposed to actually be. But naturally I began to follow the river, and I found some things that definitely didn't seem like they were supposed to be happening. For example, I found these trees half submerged in the water, like a giant tsunami had torn through the landscape. But then, something extremely unusual happened.
Damn it.
Where the hell did all the water just go? So, that was like something straight out of the Time Bandits. The map says we're still north of Annesburg, only now if we backtrack there's no water, but a few moments ago we were just literally canoeing on a giant lake. Oh, and you know what? The more I explored and played around, this really became one of the most interesting locations I managed to find out of bounds. It seems like this floor isn't actually desert, it's actually seabed. But if you thought this was weird, next it was time for a journey I never could have expected. But first of all, I was completely fascinated by what seemingly appeared to be the edge of the ocean. My boat began to float, and you could see where one half of the game wanted to spawn in the water, and another half wanted to spawn in a totally different biome. To me, this was really fascinating. Except when I looked into the distance, there was even more lake to explore, and I wanted to know just how far can I go, and how far will the game let me sail on this water? And so began a brand new challenge. I spawned in a boat, and to my amazement, it worked. The water let me continue to sail way far beyond where the solid textures of the ground were. I was fully expecting my boat to just fall off the edge of the world, because the land loses all of its collision here. The water, however, is a completely different story. I was able to float on this river for a very long time. There was something unusually beautiful about this landscape to me, and as I began to sail away, I could see the land getting further away into the distance, becoming more LOD as I got further away. Pausing the game at this point didn't reveal my whereabouts. I was completely off of the map in uncharted territories. I must have sailed on the water for literally an hour's worth of gameplay, and it took a long time. However, eventually I began to see something promising. I could see the distant mountains with snow, which meant we were going to be close to where I wanted to explore. I wanted to see where exactly did this river end. Then, suddenly, the water began to change to a bright crystal blue, and up ahead I saw an opening. It looked like my answer was within reach. But what I found kind of shocked me. I literally reached the end of the world. An endless sea and a giant wall of ice. Literally like things that you find on a flat earth conspiracy theory. Only it actually felt real because I had finally reached what looked like a giant ice wall. So, now we know it, there is an end to the world in Red Dead Redemption 2, and you can reach it with a boat. But we're far from over, and this is far from one of the most interesting things I found. So far we've explored the entirety of the west and northern region, but there's still the east and the south to explore. What's actually down in the bottom corners of the map? So, I backtracked and crossed the river once again. This time, with the idea in mind, I was going to head as east as the game would possibly let me. And things began to break apart rather quickly in this direction. Unlike the mountains, where they seemingly went on forever, the more east I pushed, well, it just quickly fell apart. Trees began to despawn, animals began to ignore me, and yeah, textures began to kind of freak out on me. However, the land did extend for quite a long time, so I kept walking and walking and walking, and eventually these strange green algae rocks started to spawn on the floor. At first I had no clue why this was happening, and I just chalked it up to one of those texture glitches. But then I saw something extremely strange. I could see trees way off in the distance, almost like they were floating on an island. But I had reached the edge of the map. If I walked any further, I was going to fall off what seemingly looked like the edge of the game's playable region. And then, I fell. We had somehow reached Guama. And what I ended up finding on Guama was way more ambitious than anything I expected. If you expected this video just to explore the out-of-bounds regions in the Red Dead Redemption 2 map and completely ignore Guama, then you're wrong. And by the way, Guama is possibly one of the most ambitious things Rockstar games have ever cut from their games. We all know Guama. It's featured in an entire chapter of Red Dead Redemption 2 which takes place here. But what most players don't realise is that Guama was never meant to be this short. Originally, Guama was planned as a fully explorable island, not a backdrop, not a set piece, an actual region we could explore. And there's a ton of evidence proving this. Some of which I've covered in earlier videos of mine on this channel, and some which you're clearly going to see in this video. First of all, the jungle doesn't just extend on a little bit outside of the playable region. It goes on for miles and miles and miles. The deeper you walk into Guama's outer bounds, the stranger it gets. I started hearing sound effects I'd never heard before, ambient noises that don't exist in any other regions on Guama, and the environment itself then began to break down. There were trees and plants spawning where they absolutely shouldn't, and there was terrain that wasn't necessarily adding up. But one thing that was for sure is that no matter how far I walked on Guama Island, the terrain remained solid, meaning I could literally walk as far as I wanted to. There was no falling through the map, no invisible walls, no kill zones. And I found some rather interesting things, like this giant cube that seems to just be spawned here like a giant monolith out of 2001 Space Odyssey or something. Clearly this is a map glitch, But the fact that you can just stumble across this giant alien-looking cube out here in the jungle is rather unsettling. Every peak I climbed revealed another one behind it. Taller, further, more extreme, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if I walked for about 2 hours before I reached the end of the island. But not only is this place massive and reveals how ambitious Rockstar's plans were for Guama, but it also contains some unique cut animals that were never meant to be found. For example, take the tiger shark. If you head to this specific beach outside of the map boundaries, then you go inside of the water, you can actually get a tiger shark to spawn. It will then swim onto the shore and die. You cannot study it, you cannot take a journal entry of it, and it will not be added to your compendium. But it just goes to show that they planned on adding a ton of unique animals to Guama for us to find. Then there's the green turtles. These were clearly planned for the full game because once you study them, you'll actually get a drawing inside your journal of them. They float just off the coast of Guama, and you cannot interact with them. And then finally, on Guama, there's the Lost Arches. These massive rock formations that exist in the game's world but are never seen during normal gameplay, even in the missions or the chapters on Guama. Obviously, these were meant to play a slightly bigger part of the island's charm when we were meant to be able to explore a lot more of it. But they just obviously didn't bother to remove them once Guama was cut. Perhaps the most biggest crime Rockstar committed with Red Dead Redemption 2 was adding what looks like the entirety of Mexico to the game, but never actually finishing it. Mexico. Yep. The entirety of Mexico exists in Red Dead Redemption 2. It's unfinished, unpolished, but completely solid and fully explorable. When you cross into Mexico, proper vegetation starts appearing. Ambient Mexican music actually plays from Red Dead Redemption 1, and yet it's completely empty. There's no NPCs, there's no life, which somehow makes it even more unsettling. Exploring all of these regions really opened my eyes just to how colossal Red Dead Redemption 2 really was. The fact that this game only took 5 or 6 years of development is actually quite amazing when you see the sheer amount of content this game really has. If you played Red Dead Redemption 1 back in the day, there's this weird emotional punch here too, because you'll begin to recognise areas you remember riding through years ago. Like the fort where John Marston ends up finding Javier Escuela. This place is fully modelled, but when you get inside, it lacks all of its textures completely. It's a ghost of a memory that's just sitting here, making us wonder whether Mexico ever was going to come to Red Dead Redemption 2. But if you keep on walking past the Mexico borders and way out into the plains beyond New Austin, out here, all of the textures and plants and vegetation begin to thin out. And what you're left with is this really surreal, Martian-like terrain. This was probably one of the most fascinating regions for me because standing out here really made me feel like I was standing on Mars or something. Anyway, yeah, I'm just blabbering on at this point. If you haven't already, it would really help me out if you could subscribe to my channel. I noticed that when I ask for subscribers, I actually get triple the amount per video. Stay safe out there, and adios.